So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sumner McCulley. I'm the Events and Program Specialist with BC Food and Beverage. And I'm pleased to welcome Steven, the founder and CEO from Icicle Technologies, here with us today. And we're so looking forward to this presentation and discussion, and looking forward to having all of you here today. And Steven, I will let you take it away.
Okay, fantastic. Let me share my screen here. Can you see that okay, Summer?
Yeah. Very good.
Okay, fantastic. So thanks for the introduction. I am Steve Burton. I'm the founder and CEO of Icicle Technologies. And most of the time people call me a technologist. I have a background in manufacturing. But even more than that, I'm really a serial entrepreneur. And I've started about a dozen companies altogether. And as is the experience with a lot of other entrepreneurs, most of the early companies I started sort of crashed and burned. I actually closed one that never even made a sale. And another time I adopted an amazing new R&D technique, but then I found out it couldn't scale in practice. But every time I had a company that sort of came up and then failed, I kind of learned something from each failure. And I incorporated these learnings into my next engagement. And at my core, I'm really an incorrigible optimist. So I'm always optimistic. So I always got up and moved on to the next one. And eventually I started learning, not just from my failures, but also from my successes. And I myself ran a successful manufacturing business. And but then as I was in the software business, as I was in the manufacturing business, I kind of started to work with automation and software. And I decided at one point that software was way more interesting than the manufacturing to me personally. So I went and got a degree in software. Then I started specializing in business systems because I had this background before. So I worked in medical, manufacturing, telecom, and energy. And eventually I did a major project with BC Hydro for developing their capital forecasting systems. And we managed about $8 billion in assets. I say we, I developed the software for it. I didn't work for BC Hydro. And we did some really cool things with that, like doing what-if analysis that goes out 50 years in the future to determine what bundles of capital investments are the best. And in order to kind of accomplish this, I really had to dive into the bowels of accounting and BI software to figure out, kind of how to make all of this happen. And I was always looking for a product. And during my journey through life, I had a few bouts of foodborne illness. So I was actually kind of well aware of problems with the food chain. And at one point, one of my clients was a food manufacturer. And when I got the site tour, I found that there was a room that they had that was filled all the way to the ceiling with paperwork and binders. And I was like, what is that? And they said that was their food safety system. So I thought that there must be a better way to manage it than with paper binders, and did the market research, and I found out that yes, in fact, there were solutions out there, but they weren't adopted very well. And so I decided to take a kick at the can and developed a food safety application originally. And when I got into it and I started to work with food processing companies, I became kind of quite surprised, really, about the state of the industry itself, because I thought that it was like so well established, so mature that kind of everything had already been done, particularly around things like inventory management and logistics. I thought that it had all already been invented. And I was quite surprised to find out that a lot of companies are still doing a lot of things really manually. So I resisted the flow to kind of expand our scope for quite a long time. And then eventually I got to the point where I just couldn't resist the current anymore, and decided to develop something really comprehensive. And now I have a really kind of interesting position because I get to see a lot of different companies, and I've been to food production facilities all over the world. And kind of gives me a little bit of a unique vantage point because I can really see kind of what the best practices are in some facilities and how those can be translated into others, which I think is why I was essentially asked to come here today. So the topic of the talk today is driving the key considerations to driving profitability. So how do you improve your margins, essentially? And we're going to talk about the metrics, or some of the metrics, just some examples of what you can use to maximize your revenue. And we can talk about the data-driven opportunities and the limitations that you might encounter. And then we'll talk about how you can amplify your success using data. And then we'll have a Q&A session. Okay. So one of the things I was really surprised at when I first went into the food industry was how skinny the margins are. They're actually lower than the average for many other industries. And I think that makes it kind of difficult for a lot of companies. The industry as a whole, the food industry as a whole, is very mature. There's a lot of intense competition. And there's a lot of kind of negative factors. There's the current economic conditions being one of them. So, you're facing high costs, including rising ingredient prices. You've got labor shortages. You're really continually having an increase in regulatory burden, which is an area that I personally have dealt very deeply with. I've also observed that sometimes food processors are bullied by larger retail customers. They're also really gouged by middlemen. There's rising transportation costs, and I think the general perception is a little bit negative. A lot of our clients, where it seems like it's really difficult to make a buck. But when I kind of look at the overall picture and step back, as somebody who came from outside the food industry originally, I want to ask, the question, is that really true? Like, in some ways, you guys have opportunities before you that your grandparents and great-grandparents could never have dreamed of. I mean, the technology opportunities you have alone are just astonishing. You have the opportunity to automate. You have a global supply chain, so you no longer really have, absolute shortages of products. Like, sometimes it's difficult to get an ingredient. But you can get ingredients from all over the world. If a crop fails, it doesn't mean your product line can no longer be manufactured. You've got good government support that invests in infrastructure to get your products moved to market, to support you during pandemics like just happened. We took advantage of that as well, and that was very welcome. You have ready access to consumer markets. The transportation network is quite effective. And you're also in a very positive situation in that the products that you guys make are actually staple products that everybody needs. We did have a few clients that dropped off during the pandemic or had to suspend operations because they were dealing with food service or with hotels, that are only now just really bouncing back. But generally speaking, if people are in a situation where they don't have money, food is probably the last thing that they stop buying, right? So that's a good position to be in. So when it comes to kind of increasing your margins and improving your profitability, what are the impediments that you deal with? So first of all, you need to know if you have a good market or a market at all. And I think everybody who's attending this seminar today probably already knows the answer to that question, because you wouldn't be members of the BC Food Bev Association if you didn't have a market. And once a customer writes you a decent first check, that's the point at which you know that you really do have a market. But there's inefficiencies in a lot of operations, and sometimes I go into operations and I'm just amazed at the efficiency, and other times I just have to shake my head because I see, at one facility there's some process that can be simply and easily automated, and another one, there's 20 people standing around doing that manually. So each facility is unique in terms of where they can apply it. Certain processes can be automated, certain ones can't. But eliminating the inefficiencies is really important, because you face a lot of competition, and the competition sometimes is much larger than you, and they have economies of scale, and they have bigger markets. They have the ability to have more market clout when it comes to buying raw materials than you do. So ultimately, if you can't compete, if you can't make your operation efficient, you can't really thrive. Really, more often you're going to just slowly die. So the way I like to think about it is that, running a business like this is running away from a bear. So, when you're running from a bear, you don't really need to be faster than the bear. You just need to be faster than everybody that's also running away from the bear. So the same is true here. You just need to be ahead of your competition. So you don't necessarily have to be 100% efficient, but you need to be more efficient than your competition. Okay, so this slide here talks a little bit about the margins in the food industry, and there's a really bad downward depressing trend, as you can see. So this is the latest FCC food and beverage update from the last quarter, and as you can see, margins are falling. And there's the doom and gloom prediction is that there's going to be continued pressure on margins next year as well. But when you look at this kind of data, it's a little bit kind of important to kind of think what's behind it a little bit. And when I look at this, I actually see quite a positive picture, despite the fact that there's a bit of a negative slope. So you can see that the clear downward trend. But look what happened before. 2016, 2017, 2018, market was going up, looked relatively healthy. And then all of a sudden, it crashed off. Well, what happened in 2019, in 2020, and what started to sort of turn around in 2021 is that we encountered a pandemic, right? Everybody closed for a long time. We had labor shortages. People couldn't show up for work. We did have segments of the market that dropped off, but it's already starting to come back. In 2022, I don't even think should really be on this graph because it's an incomplete year, so it's not fair to show it to the rest. But this is a kind of a good example of how kind of negative sentiment in the market can kind of be a bit misleading. But when if you go back to the kind of base level and you think about where you should be, like it's important really to have a target. So most profitable food companies, like the ones that are more kind of exemplary, are going to have margins in the range of sort of 20 to 30%. So that, keep that kind of in mind for something that might be good for you. Now, there's no silver single bullet. There's no single solution, right, to any of these problems. But ultimately, to improve your margins, you really need to do two things. You either need to maximize revenue, or you need to reduce costs, right? So there's a poll question at this point, and what we want to know is, in terms of these two, which one is going to be more important for you? So is it going to be reducing costs, or is it going to be increasing revenue? So we'll give everybody a minute to answer that. And it seems like a long time when you're sitting in silence, doesn't it? Good news is it's just 20 more seconds. Okay, so there we go. So we're about 50-50 split between the two. In fact, we're 52% on each one. So yeah, actually, my apologies, because this is a bit of a silly question, really, because both increasing revenue and reducing costs are important. So the correct answer is actually C. It's number 3, which was about there. So increasing revenue, I really look at it from like two different perspectives, right? Like one part is that you need to, like, the goal is ideally to increase revenue, but on the revenue side, you also want to make sure that you at least maintain your existing revenue. So in terms of increasing revenue, there's a number of different strategies that you could do to make that happen. One of the things you could do, for example, is you could have brilliant marketing, right? You could be like Starbucks and convince everybody that, $5 is the rational amount to pay for a cup of coffee. Or you could be like Lululemon, where $138, seems like a reasonable price to pay for a pair of leggings. But these are marketing strategies that are kind of difficult to replicate. And if you're an all-star marketer and you can somehow convince everybody that your product is, worth 10 times as much as it perhaps is, then good for you. But most people have to kind of go to different strategies to really increase their revenue. So they find new markets. That's one area to do it. Obviously selling more products or selling different kinds of products. So increasing your product line is a good idea, but that's also a little bit risky. So we can talk about that in a minute. You can raise your prices if that's possible to do so. Right now in this inflationary environment, everybody sort of expects it to some extent. So that might not be too bad. But there's other challenges with that when it comes time to deal with your retail clients. In terms of maintaining your revenue, I think by far one of the best ways to do that is to keep your quality standards high. Cost of customer acquisition is really high. I used to have a manufacturing business, and it was like pulling teeth to get new clients. You have to go out there, you have to advertise, you have to sign them, and then you deliver them an order, and then if the order comes back because there's a quality problem, nothing is really more depressing than that. So keep the quality specs up, which requires, of course, that you establish specifications in the first place. You take measurements to make sure that those specifications are met, and you need to be able to produce a repeatable product. You need to meet your customers' expectations, delight your customers in general, and minimize your customer complaints as much as possible. And you can be sure that if you produce an inconsistent, shoddy product, that your competitors will come right up the middle and take your market share away from you. So maintaining the revenue is also a very important kind of aspect to this. But most of the opportunities for many companies, most companies are doing whatever they can to increase revenue already. So reducing your costs is a much better way to deal with that. Like one thing you might want to try is to buy more for less, right? So squeeze your suppliers, stretch out your payables, but there's a limit to how much you can do that. Sometimes if it makes sense for you to do so economically, you might want to buy more inventory in larger lots so that you have a better price perspective from your suppliers. You might want to reduce your overhead as much as possible. If you have a really small, inefficient operation and it's costing you an arm and a leg for overhead, maybe going to a co-pack is a better idea. Once you get up into the kind of larger volumes, that doesn't really make sense. But for small companies, sometimes it might. You might try to pay less for labor. I don't know about you guys, but most of my employees don't really like it when I try to lower their paycheck. So that's not always possible. But there are ways to automate, and you can automate your production processes. And sometimes, this isn't just a kind of an option. This may be required. Like, for example, one of our newest clients is up the valley building a new facility right now that's just about to come online. And I went out there to tour the facility. I'm under NDA, so I can't really talk about it. But I will tell you that if you're producing the same product they are, and you're not up to their level of automation, you better watch out, because these guys are going to come for their market share with an amazing sort of technological advance in terms of their facilities. So, keep your finger on the pulse of what's possible, and really consider the fact that if you don't automate, others in some cases might. But the part of automation that I deal with isn't really that manufacturing automation. I don't sell those sorts of systems or anything like that. It's more about business process automation, because a big part of your labor, and it isn't just on the production itself, it's on the business processes around them, on procurement, logistics, on sales, on quality assurance, food safety, that sort of thing. So these are areas where a lot of companies that I've seen can really make a lot of improvements. So in order to identify if you're making improvements, you kind of need to know where you're at right now. So it's sort of like taking a trip. You need to identify, well, first of all, where are you? Where are you located now? Right? Where do you want to go? What's your destination? And only at that point can you figure out kind of what route you're going to take. So it's important to take metric, to maintain metrics, to collect metrics, in order to sort of, first of all, figure out where you are at the beginning, and then to be able to do checks along the way to make sure that you're sailing on the right course to get to your destination. So, what are metrics? Maybe we should mention that. So metrics are well-defined measurements that help you monitor, analyze, and optimize your production processes. So these are also called KPIs, key performance indicators, and they're really numbers that allow you to demonstrate that you have your successes, and also to help you uncover challenges where they occur. So it's going to give you some sort of quantitative indication of your performance and help you identify areas where you can improve. And if you use a data-driven approach by collecting all of these metrics, then it's going to ultimately help you make better decisions. So the mantra to live by in this regard is really measure everything. So some examples of metrics. What are metrics, right? What are some metrics that you might want to track? Well, one of them is going to be the fulfillment rate. So this metric really helps you to push your order value so that you can maximize your revenue. And it's really a measurement of the number of the percentage of orders that you've shipped compared to what's ordered. and it reflects your ability to meet your consumer demand. So when if you get an order, your inclination is probably to, try to fill 100% of the order all the time. And some companies do achieve as high as 99% fulfillment rates. The average, though, is about 80 to 90. And sometimes having 100% could actually be a bit of a negative thing. Because if you're going to be able to, fulfill any wild order that a customer just decides to call up and give you, that means that you're going to have a lot of inventory on hand. And that means that you're going to have a lot of carrying costs associated with that. So sometimes a little bit less than 100 might even be a good metric or a good target to kind of shoot for in terms of your fulfillment rate. And each company really needs to find its own, sweet spot. You want to keep from losing revenue because you want to maximize it. You need to make sure you keep your customers happy so they don't go off to the competition. And you don't want to, leave cracks in your market so that your competitors can come up the middle and steal away market shares for you. So this is really a very important metric to track, though. But the first step in tracking it, of course, is to collect the data in the first place. So what do you need to know for this? You need to know, first of all, what your customers have ordered. So typically when you take an order, a customer will call you up. They say, hey, I need 50 cases of this. You need some ability to be able to look at your inventory that you have on hand. You need some indication of what your planned production is going to be. And then you need to be able to determine whether or not you're going to be able to fulfill the order. And so the amount that you allocate to that particular customer, because a lot of companies have like long running processes that take a long time to ferment, or something where it's a perishable product that still takes time to produce, like eggs, for example. So you might not always have everything in stock that a user or that a customer wants from you. So it's important to sort of track not just what you've allocated or you're going to invoice them, but also what they ordered in the first place so that you can calculate the difference between those two. So you're going to need to know what your stock levels are, your planned production. You need to know how much you allocated. And then ultimately, you need to be able to go back to compare that to what you actually shipped. So sometimes you could even allocate product to them, but maybe there was a problem in the production process. Maybe the customer doesn't accept short shipments. So in such cases, you need to be able to capture the end result as well. And so that you can compare that to the order. So you've got the order, you've got the allocation, and then you've got the actual delivered amount. So all of those play into it. And in order to do this, you need to combine data from different parts of your organization. It can be all in one system, or sometimes you can do integrations between different systems. But in order to calculate these things in a kind of reasonable way without a ton of manual, sifting through boxes of invoices, for example, you're going to need to have, live data in different systems. And in this particular case, we really need sales, we really need production, and we really need logistics. So all of those are going to be really good. And ultimately, you're doing this to improve your bottom line. So you want to know when an order comes in if you can fill that order. If you can't, you need to proactively, communicate to your customer that you can't, when you're going to be able to produce it or why you can't give it to them right away. You need, and then if there's a problem, if you look at this metrics and your fulfillment rate is too low, that provides an opportunity for you to investigate, to go in and figure out what is the problem, right? Maybe it's that your sales forecasting process is off the rails and you need to have better sales, right? Maybe there's a problem with your equipment maintenance, so the machinery is not available for production when it comes time to do that. Maybe you need better machinery. Maybe you need to automate, have higher capacity equipment to increase your production rates. But the first step in that is to kind of know what your fulfillment rate is so that you can identify if you have a problem. And at that point, you can go through and figure out where the problem arises and take steps to correct it. So the fulfillment rate is related closely to another very important metric, which is inventory levels. So inventory levels is really important. I'm astonished how many companies have problems knowing, first of all, what inventory they have in stock, and secondly, where it's located. So these are big problems that a lot of companies deal with. Typically the more successful the company in terms of the margin, if you look under the hood at that company's processes, they've also got a really good handle on their inventory. So this is something that's really important for you to deal with. And in order to have that, you need a few ingredients, right, in your inventory control system. You need to be able to have, very accurate inventory, and it needs to be real time. So if you're relying on, QuickBooks and your accountant to process invoices to track your inventory, all hope is already lost. You have to have real-time inventory, and it has to be managed from the shop floor. Everything must be tracked by lot code, which is a regulatory requirement. So I'm sure everybody's probably doing that already. But you also need to track the best before date. I can't overemphasize how important it is, because this helps you manage stale inventory or prevent stale inventory from occurring. That's going to affect your bottom line. So it plays into both sides of the margin equation, really, because your inventory level is going to impact your fulfillment rate, as I already discussed. And if you ship out product that has short shelf life, that's going to upset your customers, and you're not going to be their favorite supplier. So it's really important that you make sure that you ship out your oldest product first. And also sometimes there's revenue opportunities where you can get a higher price for products that have a longer shelf life. But if you promise a customer some sort of a longer shelf life, you also have to make sure that you deliver that long shelf life. So your systems have to be able to kind of hide inventory from your shippers that don't meet the specifications in your contract with them. So that requires a little bit more sophistication than regular shipments might. But there's a lot of opportunities on the minimizing the cost side as well. So one thing you can focus on is really reducing waste. So how does one reduce waste? You can use your oldest ingredients first, right? So that's really a no-brainer. But sometimes that's challenging for a lot of companies. I've been to many facilities where I've seen product being disposed of because it went stale before it was used, right? So you need to know where the products are located and what the best before date is on them so that you can use your oldest ingredients first. Same thing on the product side, right? You don't want to ship something that you just produced 5 minutes ago when you still have something from last week kicking around, provided there's sufficient shelf life. So you're trying to avoid spoilage. And another sort of sub-metric here, or metric really, that you want to track as well is the waste. So when things do spoil or get damaged, and you get rid of them, you need some sort of way to track that, and you need to be able to analyze that afterwards. Figure out if there's a problem, and if there is a problem, go in, investigate. What is the issue? Is it that we're not using the oldest ingredients first? Is it that we have a problem with insect infestation? If our warehouse staff are smashing things with forklifts, we can identify what the problem is. But in order to identify it, we first need to know there is a problem. So tracking that is really important. You also have to another thing that you can do to minimize waste is identify surpluses. Right? So maybe you've got extra ingredient that's been kicking around. It's not really flowing through your system. Inventory costs you money. The carrying cost of inventory is expensive. So being able to analyze your ingredient flow and making sure that stuff isn't stuck as it's on its journey through your facility is really important. And the same is true with product surpluses. So if you've got extra product, maybe it's time to have a sale and offer a discount to get rid of that product so it doesn't go stale and then you lose all the money from it. So these are opportunities to reduce waste. And the other thing that you can really do is you can really save labor. So if you've got really tight control over your inventory, not just in terms of what you have, but in terms of when, what you need and when you need to order it, then at that point, you don't end up with all your workers standing around, waiting to do production when you're short an ingredient and unfortunately, you can't make any product today. So you really want to avoid that. So to do this, you need a real-time inventory control system. It's got to be easy to use, it's got to be accurate, and it's got to be current. And you must track by lot code and by best before date. And then on the other end, you need some sort of ability to report on it so that you can measure your inventory levels and take it from there. Next one I wanted to talk about was was the sales growth rate. So this is one of the key metrics. It's really the change in your sales over time, right? Ideally growth. You don't want to see a decrease in sales, but that could happen too. But what it does do is it helps you forecast your future sales. So if you know what your growth rate is, you can assume that your growth rate is going to go up unless you have some sort of shock to the system, in which case you need some way to react to it quickly. But forecasting your future sales is really the beginning of the process of driving your procurement decisions and your production decisions. So it's important to track this one. And in order to track this, you need lots of historical data. So the more the merrier. You need a system that allows you to analyze that data. And a nice to have thing, which I've seen companies kind of manage without it, but it's difficult with spreadsheets and stuff, which is some sort of automated way to plan your production. So you need to plan your production based on your sales and your inventory, minimum inventory thresholds and that type of thing. And then you have to have an ability to kind of reorder it, which I'll discuss in a little bit later as well. And then you need the ability to react to changes. So if there is a war in Ukraine and the price of wheat just went way up, what are you going to do about that? How quickly can you react to those changes? Unit cost, really tough one. I'm surprised at how many big companies, don't really have accurate data on unit cost production. There's really the unit cost is made up of a number of different factors. So you've got your raw material costs, you've got your labor costs, you've got your overhead costs. So those are the three big ones: raw materials, labor, and overhead. And then if in some cases, if you're some sort of like a greenhouse grower and it's an energy intense environment, you might want to track other things like electrical consumption. But these are, but most facilities can do quite well just on the top three there. And the reason that you want to track this is because it drives your pricing decisions, of course, right? So if it's going to cost you $1 to produce something, you don't want to sell it for 80 cents because that's not going to be good. And at the same time, if you're selling it for $2, that could be great, but maybe you'll be able to gain way more market share and make more revenue, at the end of the day, if you sell it for $1.50. And maybe if you have efficiencies in your production system, that can give you a competitive advantage too, which could be really good. But most companies, even large companies, really don't have real-time unit cost data. So they don't know at the lot code level, for this particular lot, how much exactly did that cost me? Most of the time they use standard costing models, and it's the accountants that kind of figure that out. And those are typically updated only on a periodic basis. So, once a year is quite common. Once every 6 months is probably the most common. And, a more kind of progressive company might be able to update their standard costing models every quarter. But it's too slow, in my opinion. I mean, I think those slow reaction times, that slows your reaction times. And if you have like exogenous shocks in the economy and all of a sudden you need to be able to change things, relying on a periodically update standard costing model is not a good idea at all. So you need to be able to track accurate, real unit costs at the lot code level. And in order to do that, you need to have data from different systems within your organization. You have to have procurement information, you have to have logistics information, you have to have production information, all of those things. And of course, then you need to be able to calculate it. So that's important. One more thing about that, maybe before I go on, is that there's also the notion of comparing the theoretical amounts when you're designing your products and the formula. You can kind of project what your expected costs would be. It's very useful to compare that to the actual production costs to be able to see the variance between the two. Another one is the overall equipment effectiveness. So this is really the availability of equipment and the performance and the quality. These are the three factors that play into this particular metric. And it can be done at the individual machine level, it can also be done at the line level. So the bigger companies are going to use those KPIs, machine availability, performance, and quality. Can discuss how those are done if you want to ask questions on that. And the efficiency here is typically the world-class manufacturers, like the best you can approach for is going to be like 85%. That's what you'd strive for. Whereas 60% is quite typical for a solid organization, but 40% is really not uncommon at all. Like, yeah, equipment availability is one of the major issues for sure, and quality is probably the next one that really impacts it. Like if you're producing, tons of products down your production line, a mile a minute, but every fourth product has to be discarded or reworked. That's not good. And most of the problems are related to maintenance events typically. So there's two types of maintenance events. You've got planned downtime, you've got unplanned downtime. With planned downtime, you've got preventative maintenance, which is very important. You want to avoid like massive recalls caused by inaccurate or insufficient preventative maintenance, because that can be a food safety hazard. But also, if you don't take care of your equipment, it's going to break down. Changeovers are another main issue if you're moving from one product to another. And then unplanned downtime is going to be breakage, it's going to be equipment fallout, it's going to be like jams, misalignments of products as it's running down your line. And in many cases, there's opportunities to automatically collect data on this because a lot of machines have the ability to connect to IoT devices and to be kind of aware. So you can collect this automatically. You can also collect data for this manually. And in order to do this, you need some sort of a maintenance program like system. You need a procurement system. You need, because you have to be able to order your spare parts and make sure that you have parts available on time. You have to keep track of those parts in your inventory so you know where they're located when you need them. And then you have to have task management. So you have to be able to assign tasks to individuals to do by certain deadlines and to verify that those tasks were actually done in the first place. And so if you do this, you can track your downtime and trend it as well to see if you're improving or not. And you can create, and you need some way to be able to create work requests. So if your employee sees that there's the machine's making a funny noise or leaking oil or something like that, they have to be able to contact the maintenance department. Maintenance department needs to be able to issue a work order, make sure the right people with the right skills and the right parts are in the right place at the right time. So all of this needs to be done. And a nice to have, which is not absolutely necessary, I don't see too many companies doing it, is to have some sort of failure profiles so that you can have a higher level kind of look at, when your machine is going to have to anticipate when your machine is going to have a major overhaul or be replaced, for example. Another one is vendor performance. So with vendor performance, it's actually not a single metric. This is a collection of metrics. But if you do it right, it can actually be a competitive advantage for you, because you can make sure that you're working with vendors who actually perform for you and help you in your goal to better margins. So the things that you really want to look for with respect to the vendors is you want to look at the quality. Are they delivering the quality that they promised? Have you captured the specifications that they promised you in the first place so you can even measure them, right? A lot of companies don't do that. Important to do that. Test periodically against it. Delivery. What's the lead time, right? What's the difference between the actual delivery times and the expected times? How is that changing over time? Are they innovative? Are you seeing new products coming from them that's going to help you? What's the risks associated with that? Where are they located? Is the risk of food fraud and bioterrorism, endemic in the country where they're coming from? And how do you mitigate that risk? So first of all, identifying the risk. If there is a risk, controlling that risk is important. So this is a kind of a food safety and also economic consideration. And what's their customer service like? How many complaints are you getting that's a result from this particular supplier's products, right? And maybe it's time to look for a new one, right? So you need a lot really of data to be able to come up with all these various metrics. You need information from your procurement system, from your logistics system, from your quality control system. You need to be able to trend the changes over time. In order to do any of this, you need to first of all have some way to define who the suppliers are, to assess the suppliers for their food safety, their third-party certifications, and to be able to assess them for the risk of bioterrorism and food fraud, like I mentioned a minute ago. And you also need a mechanism to approve the suppliers. So you have to have some permission system to be able to say, okay, who is authorized within my organization to approve suppliers in the first place? You have to track their fulfillment rates. You have to track those specifications. You have to keep track of the test results. You have to have their pricing information and changes in pricing, and then track complaints also. So now we have a different poll question coming up, where we need to be able to essentially, I would like you each to identify what are the important aspects to you in terms of metrics that you want to track, like order them in terms of priority. So we'll give you 1 minute to do that again. I was thinking about giving you 2 minutes, but that 1 minute last time seemed like a long time. So let's go for 2. Let's go for just 1 this time too. Just about 15 more seconds, Shadur. Okay, so here we go. So what are the results here? Overall equipment is the winner. So we're at 93%. Next one would be fulfillment rate. Then we would be at inventory levels, and then vendor performance, and then sales growth. Generally, I think that this is a pretty good reflection of reality for a lot of businesses I see. Like overall equipment breakdowns, equipment problems is really a major problem for a lot of facilities. I do see inventory as being, probably a little bit higher than number 4. And fulfillment rate, though, I think is a solid number 2. So I think we're generally in alignment with what I see in the market with those polls. Thank you for that. Okay, so now that we talked at least about 6 metrics, of course, there's many more metrics that you can measure, but in terms of the 6, let's talk about how those metrics then can be actually applied in real life. So your objective here, keep in mind, is to optimize your profit, right? Your profit margin. You want to have maximum amount of profit. So let's explore a little bit how we can use some of these data-driven metrics to accomplish our actual goals. So one of the ones that's very common is just-in-time inventory management. So this is all about making sure that you order what you need, and only what you need, and make sure that you order a sufficient lead time to have it when you need it, but not too much early. So what you want to do is you want to have essentially the minimum amount of inventory at any one time. So of those metrics we discussed before, fulfillment rate absolutely plays into that, because that's going to help drive your understanding of whether or not your policies in terms of procurement are appropriate. Inventory levels itself. So you need to keep track of your inventory levels. You need to have inventory thresholds so that they can be triggered if it drops below a certain level. You also need to know what your maximum inventory thresholds are too. So, if you order too much product and you don't have anywhere to put it, this is a major problem. So you have to kind of balance those two things. Also, your vendor performance, it helps, that's going to help drive that as well. So, are your vendors reliable enough to be sure that, your just-in-time inventory is going to be able to run smoothly? And, your sales growth rate, so you can be sure to have product available as your sales growth goes. So why do you want to do that? As I mentioned before, inventory is expensive. So making sure that your inventory costs are minimized is really important. And another kind of interesting one for this is that it also minimizes your losses due to recalls. And I know that most people don't think too much about recalls, but this is important because when you do have a recall, being able to really narrowly focus the products that need to be recalled is going to save you money. If you call up Costco and tell them that you have a recall, you can get a massive bill just for mentioning the word to them. So you definitely you want to minimize the costs associated with this. And one way to do that is to minimize the inventory that you have on here. In order to do this, though, you also need to have data from your sales system, from your production planning system, from your procurement system, and from your logistics system, all sort of talking together to give you the data that you need to be able to to effectively take the risk of just-in-time inventory, because you don't want to be left in a situation where you don't have product when you need it. You need an accurate and current inventory tracking system, as we mentioned, to do the metrics in the first place. The triggers about inventory thresholds I already kind of mentioned. And then you need some reporting mechanisms. So you need to be able to compare, determine what are your book sales, what is already planned for production. Once you've got that done and your inventory thresholds, then you need to be able to generate your purchasing suggestions, so that you can determine, okay, what should you order, when you should order it, and from whom should you order it. You need to know, and in order to do that, you need to know the lead times from your suppliers. So you have to track the suppliers, you have to track the supplier lead time. You have to have a really good handle on what's your existing inventory, because, as I mentioned, this is a risky kind of operation, very high benefit, but high risk. So make sure you have adequate inventory. And ultimately, you will be able to refine the process of making sure that you order just what you need when you need it from the right suppliers. Another one is, that you can use these metrics for is to really maximize your overall production efficiency. So the metrics that play into that one are the costing metrics. So if you have a good idea about your real-time costing, that's important. If you don't, you can investigate and find out why that's the case and correct the problem. You need to know your inventory levels, and you need to know your equipment metrics. Okay? And if you have all this information, then you can maximize the production efficiency by producing as much at once as possible, without wasting a bunch of time and money and finite resources, and particularly labor, which is expensive, or raw materials as well. And this is going to, and this enables also just-in-time production. So just in terms of the just-in-time procurement that we talked about before, when you're ordering just what you need from suppliers when you need it, the same is true for production. So you want to be able to start your production at the right time, so that it ends just in time to ship the product. Right? This not only kind of minimizes your overall production time, but it also extends your shelf life. So your product can be produced at the latest possible time, so that the customer gets the benefit of the longest shelf life, which keeps them happy. And it can improve product quality too. I saw a clip recently from, I think it was McDonald's, but it might have been one of the other fast food restaurants, I can't remember, but they had an automated prototype system up, and they had it set so that there was no workers inside the facility. All the products were cooked by automated equipment, and they were able to slice the onions that go in the hamburger just like 10 milliseconds before it got to your car window, as you go through the drive-thru. So you couldn't have anything possibly fresher than that. So it gives you examples if you can produce product earlier, particularly if you're dealing with perishable products. And so what's required from this? You need data from your sales system. You need data from your production planning system. You need data from your procurement process, and also from logistics to make this happen. Okay, you can also use it for reducing wastes. So we can do inventory. You need to keep track of the inventory levels, your sales growth, your equipment metrics. And waste can occur anywhere from farm to fork. So, but about 14% of overall food waste occurs between the harvest and retail. So this is going to be processors and transportation companies, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Association. The total loss to industry is about $14 billion a year. And it's bad really for two reasons. Like, first of all, you're losing money, right? Secondly, it's not environmentally sustainable. So the less waste, the better. And we see a lot of our clients committing to non-zero waste initiatives, to reworking or even upcycling products, which is a bit of a risky venture in my estimation, but we could talk about that another day if you want. There are rare opportunities, though, to also this is one of the rare opportunities. If you can reduce waste, first of all, you're going to be making more money, plus you're going to be environmentally responsible. So this is an amazing win-win. You need data from your R&D processes, from your QA processes, from procurement, logistics, and production. And one of the nice altruistic things to do is to donate to hunger relief organizations like food shelters and that sort of thing, which is great. Make sure that you're not shipping expired product though, because food safety is still one of my major concerns. What's required for this? You need to have information integrated from R&D, from food safety and quality assurance, from procurement, from logistics and production. So there's a common theme you can see behind all of these things is that you need data from multiple different departments within your company. So it's important to kind of think about how you're going to be able to track that information and how you're going to be able to collect it. And then you need to be able to sort of document what your optimal material requirements are in the first place. So you don't know that you have waste unless you know how much you should have theoretically created in the first place. And then you also need to track your actual consumption, right? So that you can determine what your losses are. And then you can compare your optimal theoretical consumption against your actual consumption. And that variance will help you identify where there's problems that can be investigated and corrected. You can also optimize formulations. So, this is going to require costing, inventory levels, and vendor management. And this will allow, and this, as I just mentioned, if you can project what your costs are going to be when you're designing your recipes, your formulas, and then you can compare that to real-time costing information when you're actually producing product at the lot code level. This allows you to identify the variances, and you can focus then on the improvements. And you can consider, for example, substituting ingredients. And we have an example of a federally regulated meat facility that's in the Icicle community. And they found that they had high labor costs associated with some of the products they were producing. And they investigated and they tracked down the product to the blending of the spices. And they found that if they could go out and order a custom spice blend from somebody that specialized in that, they could save 12% of the labor on their own product itself. So they're minimizing the material costs at the same time that they're improving their margins. So, having very tight control over your formulations also allows you to produce consistent quality. So every batch you make is going to be the same so that you're going to meet your customers' expectations. And in order to accomplish that, you need some way to speed up your R&D processes. So if you have a recipe and you need to, you're experimenting with formulations, can you somehow copy or clone that recipe and then just make adjustments on it? Can you swap out an ingredient for all your recipes on the fly? If you find that there's a better supplier or a better ingredient available that's going to be more economical or result in higher quality, can you just do that in a single operation? So in order to do this, you need to have a system that combines together the R&D, the procurement, the production, and you need some sort of a centralized formulation management system. So you have to be able to, kind of manage all your formulas in one place. And as I mentioned, clone recipes and swap out ingredients. Okay, changeover. I think this is the last one. So what is changeover? So changeover is when you're swapping out your production line from running one product to the next. You need to have your equipment metrics. You need to have your inventory levels for this. You need to know what your sales growth rate is. And if you manage the changeovers in a kind of an intelligent, correct way, or optimal way, then this can really have a significant positive impact on your margins and your bottom line. First of all, there's a direct time-saving benefit if you don't have to keep stopping and swapping ingredients. It can also allow you to become sort of more nimble and have a more kind of reliable nature to your production cycles. And every time you do a changeover, you also have to generate a little bit of waste as you set up for the new product. So the minimizing changeovers also reduces waste. So, how do you accomplish this? By running similar products, right? By thinking about how different flavors are going to interact, different fillings are going to interact. With my food safety hat on again, running allergens after non-allergens is a really no-brainer because the risk of cross-contamination is responsible for about half of all recalls. So you need to eliminate that. And also it's very laborious to clean up a production run or line after an allergen's been run to make sure that there is no cross-contamination. Another thing you can do potentially is use single-use equipment. So if you have a pump, for example, instead of continually cleaning the pump, maybe you should have 2 pumps, right? One for each flavor. That you don't have to keep swapping it all the time. So this, measuring this and implementing it requires a combination of production and maintenance data. You have to have some sort of centralized production planner so that you can organize your production in a kind of an intelligent order. And you need to be able to have a view of what products you're going to produce on any particular day or week, and then the ability to reorder them to put them in the sensible kind of order. You can also react to quickly when prices go up. So what do you do for this in the current economic climate? You can switch to alternative suppliers. You can change ingredients and materials. You can sometimes pass on price increases. Although, there's obviously limitations to that. In fact, there was an example where Frito-Lay recently raised the price to Loblaws, and Loblaw pulled all of their products off the shelf because there was a policy where they needed to be notified in advance. That policy was violated. So it's very important to keep your customers' policies on hand, to have that persisted somewhere attached to the customer record so that you know what those are. And you need to have, if you have some sort of way to be able to create transparency, that's really a good idea for that also. So this is the last poll question. So what's the most important, what data insights are you most interested in monitoring to maximize margins for your food business? I think we're ready to bid on short on time here, so let's, we're almost out of time. I think I'll actually sort of just push through the last couple of slides before we get the poll result, then we can come back to that rather than waiting. So in order to amplify your success in terms of the data automation side, you need a good reporting framework. It's kind of painful, but it's totally worthwhile doing it. So it's really critical to your success in the long run. It's going to make your operation smooth, generally make your life quite happy. So you want to eliminate errors as much as possible. You need to get your QC staff onto the shop floors to identify problems as opposed to filling out a lot of paperwork. It's going to let you sleep better. You want to adopt technologies like barcode scanning to make sure that you're eliminating errors and also providing the barcodes to your customers. You want to leverage your IoT as much as possible so you can connect to sensors and automate data collection. And generally companies that do implement this find a lot better engagement between their workers, a lot smoother kind of operations, and a much wider vision of the market. So you're going to want to make more money. You're going to want to reduce costs. You're going to want to make sure that you put pricing measures in place so that you've got opportunities to upsell, like with more shelf life equals higher prices, for example. You're going to want better documentation control. You're going to want to be able to sell that aging inventory as much as possible. And you're going to want to keep your customers by avoiding selling them stale inventory. And just a couple of metrics, like kind of numbers. If you look at companies that have actually done this, 80% reduction in the cost of paperwork up to that kind of level. Reducing manual data entry. You have one client who's figured out that by saving 6 seconds off each picking operation, it put $100,000 into their pocket each year. You can reduce your audit prep and durations down by about 40%, and the food safety and quality assurance costs by 35%. So what you need to do for this is you need to, first of all, invest a little bit of money. You have to have a champion who is going to shepherd this through the implementation and operation. And more than anything else, I can't emphasize is that you need to have an executive standing behind this initiative who has an ironclad will and will not accept dissent, because employees don't like change. They oftentimes resist it. So you need to have some sort of, authority to make sure that it can happen. Okay, is there any questions? It's time for questions. I can stick around for a couple more minutes, but I know we're going to want to wrap up. So I don't know how you want to deal with that, Summer, but it's up to you.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions right now, please feel free to put it into the chat or unmute yourself. But if you do have to get going and you do have a question, please feel free to email me and I can always send it off to Steven. But yeah, any questions at all from anyone? I do just want to say thank you so much, Steven, for taking the time today to speak to everyone. And that was a wonderful presentation, lots of great information in there. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us to hear from Steven. And we hope you got some great information out of that. And yeah, Steven, if you'd like to say any last words at all.
Yeah, I got one question here. How long does it take to implement a good data-driven system? This is a big consideration for a lot of companies. So generally speaking, it really depends on the speed with which companies can interact. So if the data can flow, if we're setting somebody up and they can get us that information, quickly, then usually it's like 2 to 3 weeks. You're using it gainfully. Although the entirety of what I discussed is a much longer project. You're probably looking at 6 months. But what I would recommend people do is pick the lowest hanging fruit first. Pick 1 or 2 areas that you want to improve. Get that under your belt, and then after that, go on to the next thing itself.
Wonderful.
Okay, it's
Yeah,
great
I'm not
talking to you
seeing.
guys.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's great talking to you guys. Oh, I see a couple more messages in the chat here. Oh, just some thank yous. Great.
Yeah.
If anybody has any more questions, I'll put the next slide on. You can see my contact information there. We're happy to we're happy to field any sort of inquiries that you have and answer questions after the fact, no problem. And I think Summer already mentioned she is going to make this slide show available, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I will be sending out the recording as well as the slide deck as well. Perfect.
All right, so leave
Looks
it there
like
then. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Steven. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.